Hello Internet, welcome to the channel. My name's Frankie, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to take your bland, boring habitats from Planet Zoo to a really cool and interesting one. How to just upgrade your habitat builds in general. This is going to be the first habitat in my new franchise mode zoo called Little Asia. It's called that because all the animals are going to be from Asia, and I'm a bit uncreative when it comes to names. So there we go. So if you want to see what happens with the rest of the zoo, make sure to subscribe so you can see the most recent uploads straight in your subscription feed. So as this is a brand new zoo, what you can see at the moment is me just creating a little staff area. As it's going to be an Asian themed zoo, I've already done all the research for the Indian theme. That means that I've already unlocked all the blueprints and building materials that are necessary. I'm using the pre-made staff buildings here in order to inspire my own creations down the road. One of the most basic and first tips that I'm going to give you is that just try not to make your enclosures square or rectangular. Try and make them a bit of a funky shape. Here I've done something that kind of resembles a kidney bean. Just having that flow and a curve to the enclosure makes it seem a bit more organic and a bit, I don't know, it's more interesting than just a square. So that is my first tip. One thing that I think can make an enclosure look a little bit boring is the bog standard shelters. So what I'm going to be doing here is creating my own. To do this, I'm deleting a portion of the fencing that I'd placed down to indicate the shape of the enclosure, and I'm going to place some square tiles on the floor just to mark out the footprint of the building that I want to have the red pandas, in this case, sleep in. I'm not going to construct the full building right away, but doing this allows me to know exactly where it's going to be and build around it accordingly. One thing that I knew that I wanted with this enclosure is to have it be recessed into the ground. Making it a bit lower than the visitors at the zoo will just add a little bit of interest. It adds a bit of verticality to the zoo. Now, I'm not worrying about any harsh or sharp edges. I just want to make sure that I've got all of the ground out so that I can start to make it look a bit prettier after the fact. And this is something that I would ask you to be patient with. When building your own enclosures, it is going to look a bit messy and not so pretty before it does look quite nice. It's going to get worse before it gets better. So just keep that in mind, and it should help you get through these stages of what I kind of look at as the butt phase. Once I've gotten rid of all the land that I think is necessary, I can then use the smooth tool just to try and make the edges a little neater. It's not going to be perfect, and that's fine because we're going to mask it in a bit anyway. I'd also like to point out that I am doing this when the game is paused, and that is because in franchise mode, once you've hired some staff, all the time that passes you're going to be paying their salary. So doing this while the game is paused will mean you're not paying their salary and you can make the most of the money that you do have. The next thing that I want to concentrate on is making a custom fence, and this can seem a bit daunting, but if you have a bit of patience, it's really not as difficult as it may first seem. The way that I created mine was to find some stone pillars in the Indian theme pack, and then line them up with the fence posts that were already in place due to the simple fencing I placed earlier. Now that I have the basic posts in place, I need to figure out how I'm going to link them. And to do that, I go to the building tab, and then I search for rope and try to find something appropriate to bridge the gap between the two posts. By far the easiest way to get these ropes into the correct position is to use the advanced move tools. It's worth familiarising yourself with these, as they will really help when it comes to doing custom builds like this. It doesn't take too long to get to grips with it, especially if you're using it and taking your time on simple things like this. As you can see, the rope doesn't perfectly bridge the gap, it's a little bit too short. Now, rather than moving all of the posts closer together, I'm going to duplicate this rope, and then using the advanced movement tools, I can keep it in place and move it ever so slightly along so that the two ropes kind of overlap, creating one longer looking rope. And nobody's going to notice, definitely not from a distance. Do this a few times, filling in the gap between the two posts, and you have a completed fence panel. Now that you have a completed fence panel, you can simply use the multi-select tool to highlight one of the posts and all of the stretchy things in between, whether that be individual panels of wood or rope like I've done here, and then you can duplicate that and move it around the enclosure, joining up all the gaps. Now I would just suggest you concentrate on the angle at which your fences are pointed. Don't worry too much about the rope in between meeting the next post. This is something that you can definitely come back afterwards and just line up and fix using the advanced move tools fairly easily. And before long you'll have a fairly convincing looking barrier that you've created completely from scratch. I've jumped ahead a little bit here, but I just wanted to show you how easy it is to push the ropes back in and make sure that they don't poke out the other side of the post. This is what I meant by coming back and adjusting it afterwards. In some areas they're going to be too long, in others a bit too short. It's not too much work to use the advanced move tools to just push them back into place. Next up, I'm going to continue the construction of the shelter for my animals. This is going to be really simple. I don't want to do anything too complicated as it's my first time making a custom shelter, so I want to keep it simple for myself so that I have room to grow in the future and don't overwhelm myself right away. With that being said, I'm going to use some simple sandstone brick panels from the Indian theme, and I'm going to run a perimeter around the footprint of the building that we placed down earlier. Now that the entire perimeter of this enclosure has been placed, we need to ensure that the keepers know that this is an enclosure, and to do that we're going to use a null barrier. This is an invisible barrier that you can place inside of your custom ones, which mean if animals ever cross this line then they have escaped their enclosure, and it also registers it as a single enclosure, which means your keepers know that this is a place to be depositing food and looking after your animals and such. It also allows you to add a door, which you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. To place these, go into your normal barrier creation panel and select null barrier, and then just place it around the inside of the fences that you have made and the inside of the building that we've constructed as well. Once you've created a complete loop and therefore created the enclosure's barrier, the null barrier will turn invisible, leaving just the fences that you put in place and a nice clean finish. And now that the null barrier is complete, we can place an exhibit door which will enable our zookeepers to get in. However, it is on a completed brick wall. So I'm just going to play about with deleting some panels, moving them about and creating a space around the door so the keepers can actually get into this building. Now to complete this building I add a little archway to the front where the red pandas and the keeper can go up and down a slope into the main enclosure. I add a couple pillars to the left and right of this archway, add a little decorative strip to just above the archway and then start to add the roof. Adding the roof is a fairly simple process as long as you're building to the grid that you created earlier by creating this group. When you create a building on the same group, it becomes quite easy to line things up with each other because there is a grid that's already set in place. It just becomes a lot more streamlined. So when creating big buildings like this, I would heavily suggest that you do that. I decided not to decorate the sides of this building at all. The idea is the trees and stuff around it are going to cover that area up. I don't want the staff area to be seen, so I am going to cover the sides of these buildings with trees and various other plants. This will help to create an immersive experience for your guests by having the staff facilities be slightly out of sight and have loads of trees around the buildings you do see. Everything will seem like it's in its actual environment, which is pretty cool. It's an immersive experience. That's what we're trying to create. At this stage we are kind of happy with the building, or at least I am anyway. I'm going to lay down some hay and stuff inside for our red pandas to sleep on, going to adopt them, send them to the enclosure and then get to work making it fit all of their requirements. As I said at the beginning of this video, I think a range of height and verticality can really add to the look of an enclosure. So to do this, I'm going to be raising a little bit of ground in the middle of the enclosure where it starts to taper at the end, and I'm just going to leave it for now. This is just to mark out where I want a bit of height to be. The next thing that I do is place down the food and water bowl because I want those to be in place so that I know where I can and cannot place certain plants and stuff, because I don't want to restrict their access to that area. On second thoughts, I delete the water bowl and start to create a natural water source. I think this is just going to make the enclosure look a little bit nicer and a bit more realistic, I guess. I like having this idea that the enclosures look a little wild. So to do this, you use the ground altering tools to make a huge dent, and then you just fill it with water. If you're going to be doing this, make sure that you have a water filtration system nearby, because otherwise the water will get dirty and your animals will end up getting sick. Now it looks like it's time for the arrival of our adorable red pandas. Let's have a little look at them as they plop down into their new home. I love the way they stand up on their hindquarters. There's something so cute about that. Oh, no. Okay, let's fast forward. Once the animals are in your enclosure, you can click on them and then go to their terrain tab to see what is needed. The way I do this is I usually click on the ground surface that is lacking the most in the enclosure, and then using a large brush I will get rid of as much of the ground surface that is in excess as I possibly can. In this case that is long grass. There's far too much long grass and there's not enough soil, so I'm going to use soil to cover up as much of the grass as I can. From here I will just jump between the various ground textures, making sure to have a nice variety and make sure that they are in varying places as well. If you have just one huge mud patch, it's going to look a little strange. Having it broken up by other textures really adds to that authenticity and natural looking ground. Now that all the terrain requirements are met, I go back to our red panda and select the plant page. Doing this allows you to then go down and select the continent button. In this case it's Asia, and that will take you over to the plant tab or the nature tab in the building tabs, and it will automatically apply the filters that meet your animal's requirements. I then use a bunch of blocks of various shapes and sizes, sink them into the ground a bunch to make this raised area that I created earlier look a bit more natural, because at the moment it's just a blob. By making it out of stones and stuff, it just looks, one, a little bit more interesting because the stones break up all of that grass, but two, it makes it look a lot more natural and convincing. Sticking with these rocks and boulders, it's time to make the barrier to this enclosure look a little less boring. At the moment it's still quite flat and at the top a bit weirdly rugged. So to fix that I'm going to take some large boulders and sink them into the barrier. I'm going to use a range and use maybe around 5 or 6, create a small section that I like, and then I can select all the items that I've placed, which will be all of the stones, and copy and paste them around the perimeter of the enclosure. Every now and then you might want to rotate the orientation of the boulders so that it doesn't look too copy and paste, but even if it does look a bit samey, what I do afterwards is come back with some different boulders that I haven't used, or even if I have used them, and just plop them in random sections. That helps to break up this very clear copy and paste pattern. It just suddenly looks a lot more natural, and the barrier looks a lot more interesting as well. Now it's on to adding plants, and I always start with trees. The reason I do this is because I like to have a wide range of different sizes of plants and stuff, and I feel like going bigger first is always a good option. I normally like to get quite a wide variety of trees, but as this is quite a small enclosure, I'm going to use the same species just at different sizes. And in this case I'm quite lucky because the Scots pine, which is the tree that I'm using at the moment, has quite a few options. And I went for this kind of bent over, crooked looking tree at the end of our, what should we call this? Just a rocky outcrop, because I like the idea that it's growing up there, exposed to more wind than the rest of the trees, so it's been bent over time. Also we've got these saplings which are really cool. It just adds extra variety to the sizes. And then I will start to add different bushes, shrubs and little bunches of flowers and stuff, normally around the base of trees and around the rocks and such. I like to really pack it into the corners. And just like with the rocks that we use to line the perimeter of this enclosure, plants offer a really good opportunity to create a little copy and paste kind of thing. Here we're creating a template, a selection of bushes and plants that we can then highlight all of them and copy and paste them and just use them in various areas in the enclosure. I like to use this technique around the edge, just like with the boulders, and maybe just to fill out some areas that look a bit too empty. And I think because there's more going on in these little piles of plants or gatherings of plants, whatever, I think it's easier to get away with copy and pasting them than it is with rocks. One thing that I'm doing in this enclosure that might be worth you thinking of for your own franchise mode zoos is adding a webcam. I'm going to be putting this inside of the panda house where they're going to be going to sleep and such, and this will allow our I can't remember what it's called, advertisement or promotion, publicity, that kind of thing. It's got a star rating. That will give us a bit, it'll give us a bit of a boost without us having to pay for marketing. That's what it's called, marketing. Yeah, it'll contribute towards the 5-star rating in marketing without having to pay for it. And it helps to educate people at home. You can also have a little look at the webcam and what it would actually look like. And I think it's pretty cool. Now we're going to move on to one of the essential parts for any small critter like this, and this is enrichment in the form of climbing. Now, you can just use blueprints and add pre-made climbing frames to the enclosure. That's completely fine, and I actually do that in a minute. But to begin with, I just want to play about a little bit and make my own. I simply use these 2 Y-shaped pieces, that's best I can describe them, I guess, and then place a big log between them and another log from that leads to the ground, allowing them to climb all over it and stuff, because these animals do have a climbing need. So it's a good opportunity to learn how to use the advanced movement tools and stuff. It's quite fun building these climbing frames. And once I'm happy with all the climbing structures, we need to add the last few enrichment items, and that's going to be things like cardboard boxes and frozen blocks of food and balls to play with. I've had my vets working on the research in the background whilst I've been building this enclosure to ensure that I have a bunch of enrichment unlocked for when the red pandas get going. And with those last few enrichment items placed, this habitat's done. Let's take a nice look at the finished product. Thank you for watching this video. I really enjoyed making this habitat, and hopefully you learnt something useful along the way. If you'd like to use this red panda habitat in your own zoos, make sure to check out the workshop on console edition and just search for red pandas. If you would like to see more videos like this, then make sure to subscribe. The next video in this franchise series is going to be a flamingo habitat. It's going to be in the same franchise zoo, so make sure to subscribe to see that. Maybe give this video a thumbs up or leave a comment on things you'd like to see in the future. But until next time, I'll see you later.